In the 42nd century, civilized warfare had become precisely that. Civilized. The Confederation of Civilized Species had spent 300 years developing the conflict resolution protocol system, a magnificent bureaucratic achievement that transformed planetary invasions into something resembling a particularly aggressive corporate merger. Gone were the days of messy orbital bombardments and inconvenient genocide. Modern warfare required proper filing procedures, environmental impact assessments, and at least 14 different permits. The galaxy had never been more organized or more tedious, which made it all the more remarkable that a single human had managed to carve out what the business journals euphemistically called a niche consulting practice in this highly regulated market. The Galactic Commerce Registry listed her under Conflict Resolution Specialist, though her clients tended toward more colorful descriptions. The hegemony of prudent investors, for instance, had taken to calling her their hostile acquisition facilitator, while the benevolent Republic of Cautious Optimists preferred violence implementation consultant. She, however, insisted on specialized contract. This distinction mattered enormously to her, though it puzzled most of her alien clients. After all, what was the functional difference between a mercenary who solved problems with explosives and a specialized contractor who solved problems with explosives? The answer, she would patiently explain while reviewing contract terms with the dedication of a tax attorney, lay entirely in the paperwork. Mercenaries were crude. They accepted vague instructions like handle the situation or make the problem go away. Specialized contractors, by contrast, required detailed project specifications, clearly defined success metrics, and hazard pay calculations that would make an insurance actuary weep with joy. Where a mercenary might charge a flat rate for dealing with pirates, a specialized contractor would itemize hostile asset neutralization, territory pacification services, and long-term security consultation as separate line items. The distinction had proven remarkably profitable. Currently, she sat in the executive conference chamber of the hegemony's flagship, reviewing a contract with Director Bexthal, a being whose species had evolved from accountants and somehow managed to make the transition seem like a step up. The director's 4 eyes moved independently as they scanned holographic spreadsheets, occasionally making small humming sounds that she had learned to interpret as either acceptable profit margins or unacceptable profit margins. There was no middle ground with the hegemon. The situation, Director Bexthal explained, manipulating the holographic display with 6 precisely coordinated tentacles, requires what our internal communications department has classified as aggressive market penetration. The phrase emerged with the sort of reverent tone typically reserved for quarterly earnings reports. She nodded, making notes on her tablet. And the target market, Mining World designation Epsilon 7. They have failed to meet their debt obligations for 17 consecutive quarters. Bexthal's tentacles performed a complex gesture that roughly translated to fiscally irresponsible buffoons. Standard foreclosure procedures have proven insufficient. I see. She scrolled through the preliminary data. And you're looking for what level of market penetration? Exactly. Complete acquisition, all assets, all personnel contracts, all mineral rights. The collective has proven unresponsive to traditional negotiation strategy. She paused her note-taking. In her experience, when the hegemony described something as unresponsive to traditional negotiation strategies, it usually meant someone had actually said no to them. The hegemony found this concept deeply offensive. Timeline? Immediate. The Dominion of Aggressive Expansion has expressed interest in acquiring the same assets. Their due diligence period expires in 72 standard hours. Competition. That explained the urgency, and likely the premium they'd be willing to pay. She pulled up her standard contract template and began making modifications. For immediate deployment against an actively contested asset, we're looking at my premium consulting package. That includes hazard pay, expedited service fees, and a performance bonus structure tied to client satisfaction metrics. Bexthal's eyes swiveled to focus on the contract figures. The humming increased in frequency. These numbers seem elevate. Quality consulting services command premium rates. Director, particularly for time-sensitive acquisitions in competitive markets. She highlighted several line items. Consider the cost savings compared to a prolonged legal battle with the Dominion. My services typically conclude within 72 hours, with minimal paperwork for your compliance department. The humming reached what she recognized as the acceptable profit margins frequency. And your success rate for similar acquisition, 100% client satisfaction over 47 completed contracts. She pulled up her performance reviews, a constellation of glowing testimonials from various alien species. Professional, efficient and remarkably creative in her problem-solving approach. That's from the syndicate of careful investors. Exceeded all performance expectations while maintaining excellent documentation standards. Confederation of reasonable entities. Bexthal's tentacles performed the gesture for impressive quarterly results. Very well. Standard terms, modified for hazard pay and expedited service, but otherwise standard. She transmitted the contract. 72 hours to complete acquisition, with all regulatory compliance guaranteed. Acceptable. The director's signature appeared in flowing script across the contract. When can you deploy? She was already packing her equipment. I can be on site within 6 hours. You'll receive progress reports every 12 hours, along with detailed documentation for your legal department. As she gathered her gear, Director Bexthal made one final note in the project file. Contractor demonstrates excellent professionalism and attention to regulatory requirements. Recommend for future acquisitions. Neither of them mentioned that her last 3 acquisitions had required the target systems to completely rebuild their orbital defense networks. Such details were, after all, beyond the scope of standard consulting contract. Mining World Epsilon 7439 turned out to be significantly less conducive to standard consulting procedures than the initial project brief had suggested. For starters, the collective of industrious borrowers had apparently decided that failed to meet debt obligations was corporate speak for actively being invaded by a military fleet large enough to block out the local sun. The dominion of aggressive expansion, it seemed, had moved beyond expressing mere interest in the assets. They had progressed to what military analysts would classify as full-scale planetary assault, complete with orbital bombardment platforms and approximately 50,000 ground troops. The initial briefing had somehow neglected to mention this rather significant detail. Standing in the cramped communications center of the mining colony's administrative complex, surrounded by panicking collective representatives whose species resembled particularly anxious mushrooms, she reviewed her contract terms on her tablet. The discrepancy between routine hostile acquisition consultation and active warzone deployment was substantial enough to trigger her hazard pay escalation clauses. This, she announced to the assembled fungi, constitutes a material breach of contract specification. Administrator Heblum, whose cap was quivering with what she assumed was distress, gestured frantically at the tactical display showing Dominion forces establishing beachheads across 3 continents. Breach of contract. They're bombing our processing facilities. Exactly. She pulled up her standard incident report form. The initial consultation request specified minimal resistance anticipated and standard negotiation obstacles. Current situation assessment indicates active military engagement with combined orbital and ground forces total. She consulted the tactical readouts. 53,417 hostile personnel with Class 7 bombardment capability. The mushroom people exchanged what she interpreted as bewildered looks, though with their species' physiology, most expressions looked bewildered. We were told you specialized in these situations, Heblum said weakly. I specialize in conflict resolution consulting. Yes. However, this level of scope modification requires immediate contract renegotiation. She began updating her service agreement. Premium hazard pay rates now apply, along with equipment replacement insurance and extended timeline provisions. Extended timeline. How long do these consultations typically take? She glanced at the orbital display, where Dominion battlecruisers were arranging themselves in standard siege formation. Professional experience suggested they were following battle doctrine, which was admirably thorough but predictably unimaginative. For a force this size, approximately 72 hours, slightly less if they maintain standard tactical protocols. Heblum's cap began vibrating rapidly. 72 hours. Their advance units will reach the primary mining complex within 6 hours, which is why we need to finalize the contract modifications immediately. She highlighted the updated terms on her tablet. I'll need authorization for Class 9 countermeasures, unlimited requisition of local resources, and a performance bonus tied to infrastructure preservation. The administrative staff huddled briefly, producing sounds like a wind chime in a thunderstorm.
Finally, Heblum approached with what appeared to be resignation. Authorized, all of it. Just, please make them stop bombing our facilities. Excellent. She transmitted the updated contract to the hegemony's legal department for their records, then began unpacking her equipment. I'll need access to your industrial fabrication systems and a complete inventory of available materials. Also, someone should probably evacuate non-essential personnel from the impact zones. Impact zones. She was already assembling what looked like a standard communications array, though her modifications suggested it served additional purposes. The next 72 hours are likely to involve significant property damage. Professional liability insurance covers structural damage, but personnel casualties affect my performance ratings. As if summoned by her mention of property damage, the first wave of Dominion dropships began their descent through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming in the pale sunlight. The tactical display updated to show landing zones arranged in a textbook pincer movement, designed to isolate the primary mining facilities from the administrative complex. Textbook Battle Formation 12 Alpha, she noted approvingly, making observations on her tablet. They're following standard Imperial combat doctrine to the letter. Very professional. Professional? Heblum's voice climbed several octaves. They're invading us. Efficiently and by the book. You have to respect proper military procedure, even from the competition. She finished assembling her communications array and began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. This is specialized contractor designation Epsilon 7439 to Dominion Tactical Command. Please identify the senior operations officer for this engagement. The response came within moments, transmitted from the flagship in orbit. This is Fleet Commander Vorthak of the Dominion Expeditionary Force. You are advised to evacuate immediately. This system is under military seizure. Fleet Commander, I'm transmitting my professional credentials and current contract authorization. I'm here representing the hegemony of prudent investors in their acquisition of these assets. I believe we may have a scheduling conflict. A pause. Specialized contractor. Our intelligence reports indicated only minimal resistance from mining personnel. Your intelligence was accurate regarding the collective's military capabilities. However, the hegemony has retained consulting services for this acquisition. I'll need to review your operational timeline to avoid conflicts with my contractual obligations. Another pause. Longer this time. She could imagine the confusion in the Dominion's command structure as they tried to classify what they were dealing with. Military doctrine had extensive protocols for dealing with other military forces, civilian populations and even mercenary units. It had no framework for handling what appeared to be a human with a business license. Contractor, you are advised that this system is under active military assault. Withdraw immediately or be classified as hostile. She checked her chronometer and made a note in her project log. Fleet Commander, I appreciate the professional courtesy, but I'm under contract to complete this acquisition within 72 hours. Your current deployment schedule appears to conflict with my timeline. Perhaps we could discuss a more mutually acceptable arrangement. The tactical display showed the first dropships touching down near the mining facilities, precisely on schedule, according to standard doc. She began implementing her countermeasures, starting with what the industry called aggressive client advocacy. The first Dominion ground units to reach the primary processing facility discovered that someone had turned off the artificial gravity in their landing zone. The second wave found that their communications equipment was broadcasting nothing but what appeared to be elevator music. The third wave encountered mining equipment that had been creatively repurposed into mobile defensive platforms. Contractor, Fleet Commander Vorthak's voice carried a note of irritation. Explain these irregularities. Quality assurance measures. Fleet Commander, my contract specifies protection of client assets during the consultation period. I'm sure you understand the importance of meeting contractual obligations. She was already moving to her next position, tablet in one hand and what looked like a standard mining laser in the other, though her modifications suggested it had been upgraded significantly beyond standard industrial specifications.
The Dominion of aggressive expansion had built their military reputation on 3 centuries of successful campaigns, each one a masterpiece of strategic planning and tactical execution. Their battle doctrines were studied in military academies across 17 sectors. Their equipment specifications were the gold standard for modern warfare. Their officer training programs produced the most competent military minds in known space, none of which had prepared them for dealing with a human who treated their invasion like a particularly challenging customer service issue. Fleet Commander Vorthek stared at his tactical display, where red icons representing his ground forces kept disappearing in ways that defied conventional military logic. The third armored column had reported losing contact after their vehicles began playing what their linguists had identified as smooth jazz at volumes approaching sonic weapon levels. The orbital reconnaissance satellites were somehow receiving nothing but advertisements for mining equipment financing options. Status report, he demanded, his four mandibles clicking with frustration. Sir, his aide-de-camp replied with the careful tone of someone delivering news that might result in ceremonial disembowelment. We've lost contact with 60% of the advance units. The remainder are reporting irregular resistance patterns. Irregular? Well, sir, the 7th Infantry encountered what appeared to be standard mining robots. Except these mining robots were equipped with military-grade shield generators and were somehow coordinating tactical maneuvers while broadcasting educational content about proper workplace safety. Vorthek's primary eyes focused on the display showing his bombardment platforms in orbit. What about orbital support? Begin systematic destruction of industrial facilities. Sir, we've encountered some technical difficulties with the bombardment system. What kind of technical difficulties? The aide-de-camp consulted his reports with visible reluctance. The targeting computers appear to have been reprogrammed. They're currently calculating optimal locations for recreational mining tours. Also, someone has been leaving customer service reviews for our bombardment performance on the Galactic commerce networks. Meanwhile, 3 levels below the primary mining complex, the specialized contractor was conducting what she privately termed aggressive negotiations with a captured Dominion supply convoy. The vehicle's occupants, members of a species that resembled armored rhinoceroses with advanced degrees in military science, watched nervously as she inventoried their equipment manifest. Excellent, she noted, checking items off on her tablet. 6 heavy pulse cannons, 12 shield generators, and, oh, this is nice, a complete orbital communication array. She looked up at the squad leader, whose nameplate identified him as Tactical Specialist Grevno. I don't suppose you'd be interested in a equipment exchange program. Grevno's species didn't typically experience confusion, but the last 36 hours had introduced him to several new emotional states. Equipment exchange program. Certain, you provide temporary use of your military hardware, and in exchange I guarantee safe passage to the extraction zone. Everyone benefits. You're offering to let us surrender. I'm offering to reclassify your current status from hostile assets to consulting subcontractor. Much better for your service records, I imagine. While Grevno struggled with this concept, she was already connecting his communication array to her modified mining equipment, creating what military engineers would later classify as an improvised force multiplication system of frankly terrifying effective. Within minutes, every piece of industrial equipment in a 50-kilometer radius was responding to her tactical commands. The results were immediately apparent on Fleet Commander Vorthek's display, where his remaining ground forces found themselves surrounded by an army of mining robots, ore haulers and excavation platforms, all moving with suspicious military precision. His communications officer looked up from his station with the expression of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid renovation. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the contractor. Put it through. The voice that emerged from the speakers carried the cheerful professionalism of someone conducting a quarterly performance review. Fleet Commander Vorthek, I wanted to provide you with a project status update. I've successfully established defensive perimeters around all client assets and implemented quality control measures for your orbital operations. Quality control measures. Your bombardment platforms were operating outside acceptable accuracy parameters. I've implemented some corrective adjustments to improve their precision and reduce collateral damage to client infrastructure. Vorthek looked at his weapons control officer, who was staring at his console as if it had personally betrayed him. Sir, the bombardment systems, they're optimizing their targeting solutions to avoid damaging mining equipment. Also, they've somehow enrolled in a customer satisfaction survey program. Additionally, the contractor's voice continued, I've taken the liberty of documenting this engagement for future reference. The footage should provide excellent training materials for military academies study and unconventional warfare scenarios. Footage? Oh yes, I've been live streaming the entire consultation. Current viewership is approaching 2 million across 47 systems. The comments are quite entertaining apparently.
Your tactical formations are getting very positive reviews from military history enthusiasts. The fleet commander felt something he hadn't experienced since his academy days. Complete tactical bewilderment. Contractor, what are your terms? Simple professional courtesy. Fleet commander, you acknowledge that the hegemony's claim on these assets predates your acquisition attempt. Withdraw your forces to a safe distance, and provide a brief testimonial for my service portfolio. In exchange, I guarantee safe passage for all Dominion personnel and promise not to share the more embarrassing portions of today's engagement with the military trade journals. Vorthek looked around his bridge, where his officers were discovering that their control systems were now displaying helpful tips for career advancement in the consulting industry. His tactical display had somehow been replaced with a customer satisfaction survey asking him to rate his service experience on a scale of 1 to 10. And if we refuse, the response came with the same cheerful professionalism, but now carried an undertone that suggested the contractor had extensive experience with difficult clients. Fleet commander, over the past 36 hours I've demonstrated the ability to neutralize 60% of your forces using mining equipment and creative problem solving. My contract still has 36 hours remaining. I'd prefer to conclude this consultation with mutual satisfaction, but I'm prepared to provide more comprehensive services if necessary. The silence on the bridge stretched until the communications officer cleared his throat. Sir, we're also receiving what appears to be a bill for orbital traffic management services and equipment consultation fee. Fleet Commander Vorthek closed all four of his eyes and made a command decision that would later be studied in military academies as either pragmatic tactical flexibility or complete surrender to a human with a business license, depending on which textbook one consults. Contractor, transmit your withdrawal coordinates. The Dominion Expeditionary Force acknowledges the hegemony's prior claim to these assets. The aftermath of what the Galactic business journals would eventually term the Exelon 7-439 consulting incident rippled through civilized space with the inexorable momentum of a particularly aggressive quarterly earnings report. Within 48 hours of the Dominion's withdrawal, the contractor's service portfolio had acquired 17 new testimonials, 43 consultation requests, and one very confused inquiry from the Galactic Military Ethics Committee, asking whether her methods violated any existing warfare convention. The answer, as her legal department confirmed, was technically no. There were extensive regulations governing orbital bombardment, ground assault tactics, and the treatment of prisoners of war. There were no regulations whatsoever governing the use of customer satisfaction surveys as psychological warfare tools, or the legal status of mining equipment that had been creatively repurposed for defensive purposes. The committee was forced to classify her methods as innovative battlefield consultation techniques, and promptly began drafting new regulations to prevent future incidents of excessive professionalism during armed conflict. Administrator Heblam and the collective of industrious borrowers had provided what could only be described as an enthusiastic performance review. Their testimonial, which now featured prominently in her marketing materials, praised her exceptional attention to infrastructure preservation and remarkable ability to resolve complex acquisition disputes with minimal damage to quarterly productivity targets. The mining operation had resumed normal operations within 6 hours of the Dominion's departure, primarily because she had somehow improved their equipment efficiency during the engagement. The hegemony of prudent investors, meanwhile, had been so impressed with the cost-effectiveness of her services that they had offered her an exclusive consulting contract covering all their future aggressive market penetration initiatives across 12 sectors. Director Bex Thule's performance evaluation had described her work as extraordinarily profitable and recommended her services to the entire hegemony trading network, which explained why she now sat in a considerably larger office aboard the hegemony's flagship, reviewing contract proposals that covered everything from diplomatic facility acquisition to competitive advantage consulting to hostile stakeholder management. The galactic consulting market, it seemed, had discovered that humans possessed a remarkable talent for resolving complex business disputes through what the industry euphemistically termed creative problem-solving methodology. The Confederation of Reasonable Entities has requested a consultation regarding their intellectual property dispute with the Syndicate of Aggressive Researchers, Director Bex Thule explained, manipulating holographic documents with practiced efficiency. Apparently, the syndicate has been conducting unauthorized research in Confederation territory. She reviewed the preliminary briefing, noting the familiar patterns of interstellar corporate warfare disguised as territorial disputes, Scale of the unauthorized 17 research stations, approximately 40,000 personnel, and what our intelligence estimates classify as weapons development with significant strategic implications. She updated her standard contract template, adding clauses for intellectual property recovery and research facility assessment. Timeline: immediate. The Confederation is prepared to offer premium rates for expedited consultation service. As she finalized the contract terms, her communication array chimed with incoming messages. 3 new consultation requests from species she'd never worked with before, 2 follow-up testimonials from previous clients, and 1 message that made her pause. The transmission bore the official seal of the Imperial War College of the Dominion of Aggressive Expansion. Fleet Commander Vorthak's image appeared on the display, his 4 mandibles arranged in what she had learned to interpret as professional Contractor, he began. The Imperial War College would like to retain your services as a guest lecturer on unconventional warfare tactics. We believe our officer candidates would benefit from exposure to alternative approaches to conflict resolution. She made a note in her calendar. Educational consulting was an underserved market with excellent growth potential. The communication array chimed again. This time, the message carried the identify codes of the Galactic Defense Coordination Authority, the multilateral organization responsible for managing conflicts between major powers. The voice that emerged belonged to Supreme Coordinator HFY, whose species had evolved from diplomatic bureaucrats and considered the peaceful resolution of interstellar disputes to be the highest form of art. Specialized Contractor, the authority would like to discuss a consulting opportunity. We've been monitoring your success rate in resolving acquisition disputes, and we believe your services might be valuable for our more challenging mediation cases. She reviewed her schedule. The reasonable entity's consultation would conclude within 72 hours, assuming standard resistance levels. The Dominion lecture series could be scheduled for the following month, which left her with sufficient availability to take on whatever the authority considered challenging mediation cases. Supreme Coordinator, I'd be happy to discuss your requirements. My standard consultation rates apply with premium adjustments for complex stakeholder management scenario. As she negotiated contract terms with the galaxy's premier peacekeeping organization, another message arrived. This one bore identification codes she didn't recognize, but the encryption suggested it originated from deep within the neutral zone, the buffer region between major powers where conflicts too sensitive for public warfare were quietly resolved. The message was simple: services required, discretion guaranteed, premium rates available. She smiled and updated her business registration with the Galactic Commerce Authority. Her original filing had listed her services as conflict resolution consultation, with a notation for small-scale dispute management. The new registration expanded her scope to include strategic consultation services, diplomatic facilitation, and complex stakeholder management, with authorization to operate in 47 sectors. The galaxy had learned that humans approached warfare with the same methodical professionalism they applied to quarterly tax filings, and the market had responded with enthusiasm. Military academies were adding courses on human-style tactical innovation. Diplomatic services were recruiting human consultants for challenging negotiation scenarios. Even the insurance companies were developing new policy categories for acts of human. 3 months later, she received a consultation request that made her pause. The Dominion of Aggressive Expansion was seeking her services to help them defend against what their intelligence described as human-style consulting activities being employed by their competitors. Apparently, other humans had begun entering the specialized contracting market, and the Dominion was finding their traditional military responses inadequate against opponents who treated invasion fleets like customer service opportunities. She accepted the contract naturally. After all, defending clients against human-style consulting fell well within her area of expertise. The irony that she was now being paid to help aliens defend against her own species' business practices was not lost on her, but it did represent an excellent diversification of her service portfolio. The galaxy had discovered that the most terrifying thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence. It was their ability to weaponize bureaucracy and maintain perfect professionalism while doing it.